Good morning and evening, depending on when you're viewing this. But today we will be looking at something I found valuable for me in regards to Raspberry Pis. As you can see, having a stack of Raspberry Pis sitting out or dealing with them as a onesie-twosie configuration, I decided that I wanted to also have the ability to get it organized and find myself a way to consolidate them into either nodes or into a cluster or something like that. So I found this 1U insert that does 4 Raspberry Pis, as you can see here. And they basically are a way to get organized, structured, so that you can put this into that, opposed to treating the Raspberry Pis as a standalone entity. So with that being said, I saw this guy out on eBay for 54 bucks and free shipping. And if you notice there's a little HDMI insert that you could stage in regards to your Raspberry Pi. Now, getting a small half a foot cable wraparound HDMI male to HDMI male is required so that you can get your hookups, but everything else you should have in pretty good shape. So when I reviewed this, I decided that when I was going to do this, I was going to review it as a viable product line for future stuff. And these are some of the things I discovered. Now, just on manufacturing capacity, I'll give this a 4 out of 5. It does come with basically 8 sets of screws, as you can see here, in a small bag, and a well-shielded and properly configured protective packaging and so on. I don't get into that stuff too much, except for the blatantly obvious things. And on the front, as you can see in the empty slots, you have a what looks like a keystone style jack interface, such here. A Pi, where a Pi would sit, and the screw mounting's there, as you can see. Another keystone, keystone, Pi, keystone, keystone, Pi, keystone. Now, unfortunately, they're not, these look like keystones, but they're not keystones, because this is a keystone right here. HDMI, male, female to female. And to insert it, basically, isn't going to work. That's okay. I figured that out when I saw the video, and they don't make any reference at all on the product line of what actually fits in it. So you have to kind of guess. So what I did is I realized that the clip receiver here will not compress enough to allow the jack to go into place. So if you cut off the clip edge, but only at the clip edge, not any farther, then you create what's called a restricted boundary that will hold the unit in one direction in the hole. So I have all 3 versions of these jacks and none of them fit. So that's okay. This one does fit the best. So what I did is I cheated. I glued it in. And that seems to work just fine. It does seam up nicely. So when you look at the front, you don't see anything. It just looks like a normal hookup as anything else. But because the keystone was the best round edged, and if you look at it, you'll see that there are edges, corner stoppers on each corner to keep it in place. All I had to do is restrict the actual spring clamp down to a little bit by removing the actual lock itself right at where it makes the lock in. And by doing that, I could get it to fit. So give me a second here. As you look at it now, you see how it is. And in just a second, I'll show you what you have to do before you can lock it in place. Okay, so I've got it taken off now. Here is the piece that I removed. Yes, it's the spring lock. And here's the piece fitting snugly in the hole. But if you pull it out, you'll see that it is basically acting as a restrictor to the edge, the corner edges, but that's it. And then of course I put it in there, and without any adhesive, it actually holds pretty nicely. Surprisingly nice. So it's just a pseudo tight fit, and that's going to be the mounting for my HDMI output when I initially program out the Pis. It's a short-term connection interface. So what do I have to say about this piece of metal here? Well, the truth of the matter is, yes, it's a 1U. It does fit a 19-inch standard rack enclosure. I found that the screw mountings are just a tad bit off, probably about a third of a quarter of a millimeter. It's enough to cause restriction when you actually put only one screw in. So what you want to do here is take your time and do the screws in a lateral way. So the challenge here is these screws here actually tension against each other, and to even out the actual setup of the Raspberry Pi. And if you look on the front, it's pretty tight. I'm not even sure I'm going to use those upper USB ports, but I don't need them normally. I only need one or two, so that's okay, and this still meets my needs. I'm going to play with it a little bit more to see if I can get that board to settle a little better. But as you can see in the corners, the board is pretty much flush against the chassis. So your USB will still work on those top ports. It's just your metal flashing is being used as a restrictor to keep the USB in place with only two screws. Now, I think it would have been advisable if they had put in a little bit more metal here to give you a little bit more, well, number one, obviously, a better anchoring, and to have what's called cable management control with small perforated holes along the way so that you could use zip ties to secure your wiring, and also giving it enough clearance underneath the underside so that you could pass low-grade wiring underneath if you need to. In this model, you can see that it's basically just hanging out there, and that's it. So functionality and interface-wise, it's decent, but for advanced management, it's not. It's just a base design. So my thought would be very easily to say, hey guys, consider the idea of adding a little bit more metal back here and just being more pragmatic about the ability to do wire ties, to conduit controls, things like that would help you have a better unit. And it's not much more money. It's mostly just this part of the metal being a little longer, roughly about an inch past the Raspberry Pi, and having those mounting holes, like I said, to be able to put in play more devices. You wouldn't even actually need to have screws in the back here. Now, as I said, I used a glue to secure my HDMI connection because of the actual size of these holes aren't quite right. That would be something that would be great to respect Keystone. These are Keystone adapter heads, but they did not fit. Goop is the glue I used because it's very sympathetic to the plastics and to the metals, so they're not going to bleed off either. So it's a really good overall over-the-counter glue that works great. It's silicon-based. Once it dries hard, it's going to hold. Then you have a small tool, like a soldering tool here, that I can use to distribute the glue where I want it to control how much glue is actually in use. And you want to do that because you don't want blobs of glue hanging out all everywhere, right? Or interfering with the interface of a Pi card. So something else to think about. Now, one thing I do like is the fact that there is an extra jack hole. You can go left or right if you want, but you don't need to. What I would use this guy for is to bring an RJ45 cable out and plug it right into that port. And do it for each and every one of them. And or a USB cable and an RJ45 port could come in here and make that connection. If you are really good and you got the right kind of cabling, you could even bring a USB, Cat5, and an HDMI cable in through here. But I wouldn't do that personally because that's just for staging the Pi, not actually using it in stage, because you would remote into the Pi from that point on. But that's pretty much my rating. I'm not going to give it any higher than a 4 out of 5. It's practical, it's functional, it's a little tight, but it works. Hopefully their next version, when I have a whole bunch of Raspberry 4s, will work a little bit better. Those, of course, need to think about heat, exhaust management again, and take it from there. That way you can have some way of controlling how all your cabling goes to the back. Well, that's it for me. I hope you guys like. If you do, please hit the like button. God bless, and have a good evening.